So let's get into some of the reactionary nature of the mind and the ego so that we can get curious about what the ways in which the ego might manifest. So Rumi says the ego is a veil between humans and gods. I also like to translate this as my ego is that which stands between me and a better version of me. And so in my yoga teacher training, Philip Urso shared with us something known as the 4 satisfactions of the ego. And so I'll share that with you now. Oh yeah, that's everything that I just said. Okay, the 4 satisfactions of the ego. Being right, being liked, being special, and being in control. There are more satisfactions of the ego. I like these ones because I think they encompass most of us. Being right, being liked, being special, and being in control. And they're kind of sick satisfactions of the ego. Because in order to be right, someone else has to be wrong. In order to be liked, I give away my authenticity in order to belong or be approved of, or to not be discarded or rejected. Being special means someone else has to be less than. And being in control means that someone else needs to give up their right to self-determination. And for some of us, we flop to the opposite. For some of us, it's not about being right, being liked, being special, or being in control. Our satisfactions of the ego, when that stress spikes, we go to being automatically wrong or being automatically disliked. It's easier for some of us to be disliked than to risk the discomfort of actually being liked. Some of us default to being invisible or being ordinary, making everyone else be special. For me, for some people, as soon as the adrenaline spikes, it's not, I give up my control. I give up my sense of agency and self-determination, and someone just tell me what to do and how to do it. And yet, when I notice myself going there, that points its way towards the reactionary nature of the mind. And whenever there's a reaction going on, the swifter it is, the more I need to be right, like, special, in control, or wrong, disliked, ordinary, and invisible, or abdicate control. The more it's an indication that there's a fear, pain, or underlying unmet need that's going on, that's running the show. Yeah. Because I can tell you, we'll just go back a few slides. Yeah. This reactionary nature of the mind. Because this is where, like, Tibetan Buddhism is one of the most oldest forms of psychotherapy. Yeah. Because you meet your shadow, you meet your fears. And what this gave me was the ability to own what's mine and be responsible, like wholeheartedly, ultimately responsible for myself and my life, because I can tell you what every single one of my ex-boyfriends had in common. It's me. Yeah, every single one of my ex-boyfriends had in common was me. And there I was with every relationship saying, you know what I'm like? You need to not be this way because you know what I'm like. And yet at some point it was recognizing that there was an underlying fear, pain, or unmet need inside of me that I was being called to work on. Yeah. And so this is where, right, the 4 satisfactions of the ego can be ever so helpful. Where we can then do some of that internal surgery So some antidotes so that you can play with this, right? Because it's not all doom and gloom and serious. We can play with this. Yeah. So you can give it away. So if your satisfaction of the ego is being right, give it away. So an easy one, a simple one, is when people talk about the weather, right? And I mean, it started snowing here in Fairbanks this last week. It's 20 degrees. And everyone's got a different opinion about the weather. And you know what? Instead of me engaging with that and my opinion and my truth, I can just go, you know what? You're right. It is really, I'm not ready for winter yet either. Or a part of me isn't ready for winter yet either. And then I talk to the next person and they're excited. And I can say, you know what? You're right. A part of me is excited for winter as well. Yeah. Give it away. If your thing's being, being liked, give it away. If it's about being special, give it away. If it's about being in control, invite someone over to do your dishes in your house while you're sitting there. Or have someone else stack your dishwasher while you sit there. And then notice that thing bubble up. And then something will emerge in that space. It'll be a resource. And that resource will say, how fascinating. My husband stacks dishwashers totally differently to how I do it. And in that moment, I have a new resource because curiosity is the opposite of judgment. If I can tether myself into something inside the window, right, inside that window of capacity, I have some capacity in that moment. Sit in the driver's seat while someone else drives your car. Like, play with the ways in which you can give it away. Notice the thing that comes up for you. Yeah. Of course, I'm not okay with other people being special, right? Because that's part of my with children and babies, which I don't have now, right? But authentic sharing here. But the pain of that underneath is I didn't get that as a child. Yeah. And so in small ways, I can begin to play with giving away compliments, saying thank you. I mean, I'm not going to swear. I'm not so into people who wear makeup and, nails and all that. And you know what? Who am I to judge? If someone puts their effort into that, I can offer a compliment around that, right? Like, just give it away, give it away, because it's good for my ego to have these little experiments. The next one, don't take the bait. So for me, that being right, it's like someone has a hook with a bait on the end of it and they've just thrown the bait at me and I have taken that bait because you know what? You just said something really inflammatory and wrong. And then there I am, like taking the bait. And when I pause, right, and I'm like, this discomfort of not taking the bait, what I saw was that person that threw the hook with the bait at the end of it, they would then go and move on to someone else. And then they'd go and move on to someone else. And I was like, wow, look at that. And then I saw all the ways in which I was throwing out bait. And it wasn't just the bait of, come argue with me. It was the bait of looking for approval, right, or looking for validation. And then in that moment, I saw my mother and all the ways in which she irritates the ever-living bejesus out of me with the Linda, I've done this for you, with that pause of, wanting something, or the ways in which she'd go out of her way to make sure that, there's food for tomorrow, or that my laundry was done, or all the things that I know how to do for myself. Thank you very much. I'm a grown woman, but she goes and does for me. And I started thanking her. And then she started to not need to go out of her way to do all of these things that irritated me so radically, which seemed really silly, but this was my truth. And she began to see me for the person that I am, which is a thing that I've been longing for my entire life. Yeah. So these are antidotes to work with your satisfaction of the ego. Yeah. So recognize what your satisfaction of the ego is. Give it away, have experiments with it. Notice when that urge arises, right? So this is mindfulness in action in real time, to take the bait, to be right, or to be righteous, or to be in control, to take the lead, right? To give away your authenticity and see if you can not. Yeah. And if for you it's the opposite, right? Being wrong or being being disliked or being invisible or abdicating control, if that's your satisfaction of the ego, then pause with that and notice that and see if you can begin to create your own experiments around that. And this is where it's that practice of embodied self-awareness over time, where there would be times when I was practicing this and I'd turn around and bite my mother's head off. But in that moment, because I've never apologized for that, right? Because I'm vehemently self-righteous that she knows what I'm like and she doesn't need to like do all this stuff for me because I'm a grown woman. And so there were times when, in my practicing of noticing and trying new things, I would default back to my old way of being. And for the first time ever, I actually noticed how much I hurt my mother's feelings and how she'd turn away. And yet in her mindfulness practice, she would keep orienting towards me and orienting towards love. And yet in that self-awareness, I would default to the old habit pattern, but I saw something that I didn't see before, which then allowed me to do something new. Yeah. Mm. And then over time, with that expanded self-awareness, we can be curious about what the trigger is, what it is that's so ultimately uncomfortable for you that you would do anything in this moment to make it not be this way. Yeah. Because the past is always living into the present, and then our life becomes more or less or better or worse of the same over and over and over again until we can pause for long enough. And so this is where, for me as a trauma therapist, I love the work of Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, and he says, when you can be curious about your triggers, when you can be curious about your reactionary behaviors, when you can be curious about what those behaviors are and what those triggers are, then we can begin to make progress. Yeah, because that curiosity is an indicator of not just expanded self-awareness, but of a compassionate space, or a potentially compassionate space. So that's that curiosity piece again. Oh, there's the references. Okay, yeah.